All right, so welcome back, everyone. And we now have a session on the Arduino documentation led by Henry, who's been our documentation lead for a few years now, and really concentrating on preparing us for the 4.1 releases and making sure we get all the documentation right. So over to you, Henry.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick update. In the last year, we've had about 1,100 commits to the wiki. Not all of them spelling and punctuation, most of them substantive. The logging page has been expanded, thanks to Peter, with detailed explanations of the logs. We don't have any build errors in the wiki. I do a daily check build and fix anything that pops up, usually within a day or so. We've added to the wiki an upcoming feature sections to contend with master only code changes and features. Pending PRs are mostly for 4.1 and are actually already in the wiki, either directly or by reference. Well, the PRs would be by reference via the upcoming features page. PRs are addressed in a more timely fashion now, and usually get to them within a day or so if they come externally. Open issues, we're running about 110. They get reviewed by me bi-weekly. A lot of them are unresolvable at the present time. Things like multi-language support, wanting to have the wiki generated into a single PDF file every day, things of that nature. But we try to keep those number of issues down to a reasonable level. Handling of features not unstable. We took on a different methodology this year. Previously, dev branch or master branch only additions were tagged with something in the wiki when they were added into the wiki as only in firmware version X.X. This leads to a pretty nasty maintenance issue on how to find and retire all those comments as they become out of date. So we instituted a new system this year where the wiki main reflects stable. Whatever stable is, we keep it updated. Master only additions are included in a section in every vehicle called upcoming features, which will list all the new pages for like what 4.1 will be now. And there's a subpage in there for other like one line or paragraph line changes to parameters or functionality or things like that called other wiki changes. This hopefully will allow, when we actually do a release of 4.1, cut and paste into the main wiki just directly without having to hunt around and remove old taglines or figure out where old sections have to be removed. 4.1 release. I estimate probably, I don't know, 80% of the wiki already exists in the upcoming features. I've been tracking everything every day that we add as a commit that should have a wiki addition to it, and either putting it on a issues list, which we'll go through momentarily, or actually creating the wiki entry under upcoming features. But there are still some significant sections remain. Like I said, there's a standing wiki issue. If you go to the wiki and click issues, there's a pinned first issue, which tracks every added or changed feature or function added to master as best as I can keep up with them on a daily basis by watching the GitHub activity. And an assignment currently is based to who coded it, but only when I don't understand enough to do the wiki additions myself or just don't have the bandwidth. So at this point, this is what it looks like. It's issues 1756, but you don't have to look for it. If you go to the wiki's issues page, it's pinned hard up at the top. And this will also, as we go through this, give you an idea of the massive amount of features and additions that have gone on between 4.0 and 4.1. It's really amazing. So I can't put the list on a single page, of course, so we'll just click through them. Now it'll give you a chance to look through them as a grant. Where there's a checkbox means it's already been added into the upcoming features page by one method or another. And then there are numerous open boxes. Really big is a lot of the bendy ruler and object avoidance stuff, a lot of the new protocols for CRSF and things of that nature. But a lot of things we've covered. A lot of things like the plane now has fences like copter. So we have a lot of wiki work that needs to be done on that. Things like wing sail, winch changes. Then we started getting into sections where I haven't been able to update it, or hoping that the original author will actually do it. When it comes to these things, you don't have to create the entire wiki. I can put all the words and formatting and window dressing around it. I just need a bullet list of features and important functions, enough information to explain the operation, and it doesn't have to have a lot of words with it. It just has to have a lot of content. So bullet lists and things like that, and I can help with the work. But where things are that I haven't been able to, or don't have the knowledge base for, I've assigned to the original code author. Where things where I could figure it out, like air brakes or the new soaring function switches, whatever, I could already add it into, or have already added them into the upcoming features. ICE start channel, PID slew rate limiting, the new DMOD stuff. Oops, there we go. The wind parameter and wind warning parameters, things of that nature, memory guard. But a lot of the stuff has already been added. Disk theory, pivot turns, battery monitor, run cam control. I don't even think this high-tech CAN GPS is available yet, so that's not really an open issue, but there was WIP for it. Smart RTL, so forth and so on. The list goes on and on. 4.1 is huge. A lot of the things I've got open action items on, and I knock a couple of them off every day, where I can have enough confidence in the knowledge base to create the wiki for it. I'll try to alleviate the burden for the coders for that, where it's not really need help in that area. Another page, more empty blocks. And the final page. So you can get a feel from that we have just a huge amount of features, additions, changes. Luckily, a good deal of it has already been done, but there's a good deal that still needs to be created. And every day we add some more. Anybody have any questions about that or anything that I've talked about so far?
Just a comment. This is really impressive that they actually show that you can get this list like this from pull request and itemize it, so you keep things don't let anything slip through the cracks. This is quite nice. Good job.
Thanks. Well, you got to watch the GitHub releases every day.
Yeah, there's a few other sort of bigger items as well that aren't captured. The new ground station work from the donation from Intel, which we're going to have a talk on tomorrow. That one, it's got its own set of HTML documentation, and it'll probably end up being like a separate wiki. We'll just need to, most of the effort would be on import tools to sort of get that translated across into a format that fits in with the rest of the ArduPilot wiki. And that'll be worth discussing with the with Marco and others from that group. For the rest, I mean, most of it, as you say, we just need sort of the dot point description, you know, to be able to start it, you know, even if we get minimal information. I don't think you've got the, because it isn't merged yet into master, the new plain PID system and auto tune. That's definitely worth linking in there, because that'll be a fairly major one that's really important for the plain 4.1 release, because it completely changes how people tune their fixed wing aircraft. But the great thing is that you're all getting very familiar with that because you're doing a lot of the testing of that feature. So it should be, you know, much easier to work with you to make sure we document that correctly.
Right. Yeah. If it isn't in master, it's not on this list.
Yeah.
So, but that also leads into some other stuff on the next slide when we're through questions up to this point.
Yeah. We should, the dev wiki, I didn't see the thing in there, but the different, the @sys file system and that sort of thing. So the various AP file system, we should at least reference the list of those and what they're for in the dev wiki, if we haven't already. So I think some of those have snuck into master as part of other PRs without them getting open issues for the dev wiki. So
okay.
If you remember in my talk yesterday, I talked about the expansion of the sys file system. And similarly with the new mission file system, there's a pending PR for that. It's worth at least referencing whether we actually put the protocol documentation that explains the format in the wiki, or whether we're better just linking people to the code, because I've put a block comment in the code describing the format of each file. It might be better to actually just do that instead of you know, duplicating that information, because the dev wiki is aimed at programmers, so presumably they're not afraid to read a bit of C++ as long as they've got a link to it so they know where to find it.
No problem. We can add that on the AP file sys as a bullet on here.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to write up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the things we did add, right? Recently we added the embedding of params and scripts and stuff like that. So that's already in the upcoming, or perhaps even already in the standard dev wiki, I think. I forget, but it's already in the wiki someplace.
I feel like this could be automated somehow, because we have hooks already for Discord and other things where you have hooks to look at the events on GitHub. So if anything gets merged, you can be like, suck it into an RSS feed or something.
Well, we originally had wiki needed, and we've been pretty good on that. Or if I see one slip past, I try to tag it with that. And then every 2 weeks I go through and look at the wiki needed and make sure they come onto this list in case I've missed it overnight or just haven't recognized it, because there's several days where there'll be 60 commits on the GitHub activity, and running through the titles, I may miss that one is important to have a wiki associated with it when it doesn't already have the label appended to it. But if we were a little more rigorous on making sure that wiki needed labels were put on the PR as it gets merged or before it gets merged, then it'd make it easier for me to make sure that this list is accurate. I think it's pretty accurate. I don't speak up anybody that's didn't see anything on the list as you review it or whatever that we need to put in there. Please just drop me a note and we'll look at the PR. I mean, look at the commit and go from there. But the biggest issue is all these blank boxes.
Yeah, that's right. We need to start filling those in.
You don't need to fill the ones that have HW on it. I'll figure that out.
Okay.
The ones that have that don't have my name on.
I actually thought HW is hardware. Yep.
No.
So the other one is, I think it's worth for 4.1 reviewing our sort of architectural diagrams for ArduPilot, because particularly like the control flow diagrams, like the ones that Leonard has done for his control has been really good. And I think those high level control diagrams done in the sort of the standard controller forms are really valuable, particularly when you're interfacing with research groups and showing exactly how, you know, the cascaded pit architecture works and where the various pieces fit together. And some of those are getting a bit long in the tooth. I know Leonard's been doing some updates on his. What's the status of getting sort of an updated control flow, you know, architecture diagram in Leonard with all of the changes that have been happening recently? Are you there, Leonard? Or have we lost you? So Paul as well, if you, it'd be quite nice to work with you, Paul, on getting a more accurate one for fixed wing, the overall control architecture. So, and sort of review the existing ones that are there for techs and the fixed wing control, and then just check that they're still all accurate for 4.1, because there's been so many changes, particularly in filtering.
Yep, it's Paul.
Yep. Hi, Paul. I see you're having a snack. Sorry for interrupting your morning tea.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So I was just thinking about, I had a look at the previous diagrams were generated, essentially the very original modeling work was actually done in MATLAB Simulink years ago.
And it can generate diagrams, can't it?
Yeah, that's right. Now, I don't use Simulink, don't have a license currently, but they were pretty simple diagrams. So I can just throw them together using, I don't know, some open source tool that means that they can be maintained longer term if we make changes to them. Because I think,
yeah, that'd be really good. It'd be nice to decide what tool we're going to use for those sort of control diagrams. Needs to run, you know, on Windows and Linux preferably, and save to a format that we can update. That'd be great, because I think, I think those control diagrams, it's fantastic to be able to point, you know, when you're dealing with research groups, to be able to point them at an accurate description of exactly how data flows through, how the control works.
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't really looked at what tools would be available or would be suitable, but if there's anyone on the call that's had experience with a tool that's been around for a bit, obviously not something that's shiny and new and might disappear in 12 months, but something that's got a little bit of pedigree to it, then I'm happy to regenerate the diagrams for that.
Yeah, so I think we'd want the fixed wing control, we want probably text, and maybe L1. Is L1 worth doing, Paul, as well?
I think it probably is. I mean, what's there at the moment is probably more, not so much a block diagram, it's more of a graphical description of the underlying concept behind the algorithm. But an actual, I think a diagram would be useful, because it would show us where does the integrated term fit in.
Yeah, it might need to be two diagrams, because it actually varies a fair bit depending on whether it's locking into a circle or whether it's navigating a path.
That's correct.
And I would love documentation just so I can find that crosstrack bug.
Yeah, well, I was looking at that issue just the other day, and we've got an integrator in there, which in theory should wind that out. So that's got me perplexed, but that's another topic.
I added that after talking to you about that. So that's the weird part.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. So some topics for discussion. Need assistance in documenting 4.1 and future releases. It's real tempting to code and never document, I know, but the job's not over till the paperwork's done. The real problem is nobody else can use it, your brilliant idea, unless it's written up. Couple of things that I have would like to discuss is I would really like to see, I'm a tail sitter guy, got 5 or 6 conversions, tail sitting tuning guidance. which is unique because most of them are vectored and don't lend themselves to any auto tune very well. Maybe the roll axis, if you're lucky. The real problem is that with a normal stance vehicle, you can pick it up off the ground, do some tuning, put it back down, and not crash it. Unfortunately, with tail sitters and TVBSs in particular, VTOL's tuning is extremely difficult. At least I found. We have no guidance whatsoever. And it's potentially costly in terms of breakage coming up and down. So one of the things that might help that is another thing that, as I've gone through trying to learn how to tune these things, we have a lot of log information provided with all the PIDX information and the attitude information graphs. I may be totally screwed up, but it would seem to me from that information after your first flights, even if you're doing the VTOL stance in air and not from ground, that you should be able to get some information about directions for tuning, or at least be able to give some extreme cases of here's where you've got too much or too little D, whatever. And I have enough control background with my masters just to be ignorant and dangerous in that area. And I think it'd be really worthwhile if we could provide some guidance from some of the good logs that we now produce. I may be totally off the wall on that, but open discussion on those two things.
It's a very good example, that vector tail sitter tuning, and it's one that we've of course got two efforts underway at the moment to create new auto tunes. There's the helicopter one that Bill is doing, and there's the fixed wing auto tune that Paul and myself and yourself, Henry, are working on. And I think there are a bunch of ideas from both of those that may be applicable to the tail sitter tuning, particularly though the slew limiter detection to detect whether you've gone over the top on your P or D. That seems to be panning out really quite well in the fixed wing tuning. And what do you think, Paul? Do you think that might be applicable to, for example, the pitch axis on a TVBS?
Oh, look, totally. I mean, the key there is a reliable detector of the limit cycle, and a measure of either the peak or the RMS slew rate generated by it, an amplitude.
Yep.
So if you've got the peak amplitude and the peak slew rate, like peak to peak on the amplitude and peak to peak on the slew rate, then that gives you really good information about setting bounds on those, and then winding the gain up and down. So you can detect that point where you start to run out of phase margin. So I think what you and I need to do is actually work on making that slew rate detector, or it's really a limit cycle detector, making that more reliable, so it spits out not just the rate of change, but also the peak to peak of the displacement and the peak to peak of the velocity.
Yes, I think if getting that as like a core library that's really reliable, and then I think it'd be very worthwhile to start applying that in the tail sitters. And the tail sitters is one of our more challenging ones to tune. If we can, I mean, I think I completely agree with Henry. Providing good documentation on guidance on how to do things manually is really important. But even better if we can provide tools that make it easier to do the job. The
TVBS challenge, I found after 6 conversions from wings to conventional cargo carrying aircraft, is the yaw axis. Mm-hmm. That's the one that is the hardest to get locked in for me, and no rhyme or reason on how to do it. Yaw,
By your
yaw
Henry?
axis earth frame when vertical.
Okay.
okay, yes,
Roll
right. So-
axis body
so-
frame. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
So differential tilt on motors when the
Right.
nose is pointing up.
Differential
Okay.
tilt on
Right,
motors. Yeah.
right. Usually the defaults, and I've done a wide range of from small to large, meter, more conventional planes, twin motor TVBSs, and Pete probably has done a lot more in sim.
Yeah.
But
There's an underlying issue there, which we probably want to cover on a tuning guide, and that is that if the center of mass of your motor assembly is in front of the pivot axis, then you get when you tilt the motors differentially, there's an inertial reaction torque, and the initial response of the vehicle, angular acceleration and velocity, is the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's what's known as a non-minimum phase system in control, and that's got some specific tuning challenges and some traditional workarounds as well. So
yeah.
we can have a talk about that.
It's a bit like
Yeah,
the tail, on fixed wing rolling takeoff when you have the canted wheel at the back. Yeah, you get a similar effect.
So pitch and roll with defaults usually is kind of flyable right out the bat. Yaw is not good enough to do a loiter with, and until you can do a loiter, you can't really do VTOL auto landings and stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, a good tuning guide for tail sitters is, I think, one of the things hindering its acceptance. I'm personally a TVBS advocate as being one of the most efficient VTOL platforms. But anyway, and I think along those lines, it might be good is it possible, I'll ask this of Paul, is it possible by looking at the logs generated from a flight in vertical, to get some idea of directions to move things? Not talking about I'm talking qualitative versus quantitative.
Yes. Okay. So feed forward. I don't know if we've got feed forward. We have feed forward on all of our loops now, I think. So that's a bit of a no-brainer to get from the log, in terms of how much actuation gives you how much steady state rate. And then the other thing you can pull out is the angular acceleration produced. The challenge, though, where you can't do a simple direct graphical analysis, is, as I've said, depending on the layout of the system, is that non-minimum phase behavior. And my recommendation there is, I don't think our control loops are currently set up to really handle that properly. I mean, the recommendation is really that people construct the vehicle, probably get the pivot point for those motors as close as possible to the center of mass of the motor. So, which makes the nacelle a bit bulkier, obviously. Yeah, we could pick that, and if you do that, then you can pick up the relationship between tilt and angular acceleration.
You're talking about the motor mass pivot point, not the vehicle mass. Okay.
No, the motor mass pivot point. So all the bit that's the motor assembly. If you pivot it around the center of mass of that, let's put up with the extra frontal area, makes it a bit bulkier, but it's going to make it a lot easier to tune. Otherwise, you're into some slightly more.
Yeah. Well, that's
control theory.
Yeah, that's something I kind of follow anyway. That's good mechanical because it reduces the amount of servo power you need to move the motor in the pivot if you have it.
That's right.
So that's something I've done intrinsically. But anyway, that's get off that. So I think that's an area that could be good. Okay, so another thing that I want to discuss is we had some actions from last year still unaddressed. One was mission commands proofing. We actually had, I think somebody volunteered for that, but we never got around to it. Where we have lists, it's a pretty clumsy.
If I could jump in on that one, Henry. Yes, that was me that volunteered, and I am working through that as we speak. So I'm going to put a PR in the next couple of days, which will have basically back checked everything compared to master and added in the new one. So it won't
super.
necessarily be formatted. It won't necessarily be formatted correctly, but because I think you've had you've got a bit of a vision as to how you want to have that formatted, but it will certainly be factually correct.
Oh, super. Yeah, super. Great. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate it, because what I want to do is get it so that it's correct, and then make sure then we can have a discussion on whether we want to keep splitting things out like Copter did from the master list or not, as a separate discussion. But right now there is a master list that has a bunch of defs on it to make it each section or each command, mission command, differentiated by vehicle. I think Copter broke out a set independently, which I don't think is up to date either. But in any case, getting the master list all proofed would be the first step, and then deciding where we want to go on that. And as going through that, by the way, we found a couple of I ran across myself a couple of mistakes that we had to correct on the behavior of some of those commands. So it's a good exercise. Last year, we also talked about making camera and gimbal better, and in terms of getting it accurate, up to date, and in a better structure. And I don't have a lot of experience with gimbals per se, but so that one hasn't been addressed. And then open to any other improvements anybody has to the structure of the wiki. We went through, one of the first things I did when I came on board a year and a half ago or so was try to get it structurally more consistent between vehicles, and in a flow by where somebody new, because I come from the hobby sector, new to ArduPilot, can get something up and running pretty quickly. And if you just go through first setup and first flight, you're pretty much assured to be in the air and get all the information you need. And then everything else is kind of window dressing for the vehicles. So, and then anything else, Andrew had a couple of things that I've noted as to things we should be doing. So at that point, I'll let it open to any issues or questions.
Thanks, Henry. Yeah, it's so great that we've got so much of the documentation already prepared for 4.1, and we just need to make sure that we fill in those gaps. So need reminders from Henry to make sure we go and write the bits of documentation, because as Henry says, unless we actually document it properly, then the ability for our users to take advantage of the new features is really somewhat limited. It's, as a developer, it's a lot more fun to write the code than the docs quite often. And so we need to resist the temptation just to add, just to keep adding new features and not go back and document the existing ones.
And again, you don't have to make a wiki. All you have to do is give a bullet list, and believe me, if I have questions and don't understand how things work, you'll get questions back on it. But I can get the work done for the majority of the stuff. Of course, I don't have but a few hours every day, but so any help is always appreciated, and a lot of you guys really do keep up when you add a feature to adding stuff, and that's really a help. We just need everybody to do it.
One that came out of the last talk was Tom pointing out that we've been really slack about the parameter documentation for APPref, because we haven't been filling in the documentation comments for the auto-generated parameter docs. And I do think we should go back and start filling those in. And the same with CITL. At the moment, all of our CITL parameters, we don't have the param docs for those. And there's a significant task to go through and fill in all those parameter doc comments in the C++ source code, so that we can auto-generate the sim parameter documentation, so that it's available in the ground station.
But I don't
relevant to this. I actually merged into master the tooling to actually do that.
Okay.
So
Thanks, Peter.
we now have a --citl option to the relevant parampars.py, which will generate something that's suitable for inclusion in the wiki. And I'm pretty sure I spotted a patch from Randy, I think, that added documentation to some of those, or no, that was actually just adding comments, not documentation, unfortunately.
So do we have, you'll have to work with me, Peter, on where we can get that wedged into the wiki.
Yeah, it might be better going into the dev wiki rather than into the main vehicle wiki, but yeah.
It should be part of the CITL portion of the dev wiki.
But it also needs to be in the ground stations. So the automatic documentation download that happens in our ground stations that gets sourced from those parameter comments, I think we should populate that. So when somebody's using, for example, Mission Planner to do CITL, and they go to the sim parameters, that they actually get the documentation for those parameters filled in, which means we do have to include it in the XML file we generate, even if we don't put it into the wiki, into the main, vehicle wiki. So there'll probably be a little bit more tooling work to be done to make sure that all gets plumbed together.
So you mean if I just hook up to a normal plane with Mission Planner, I'll see all the sim parameters?
No, you
too?
won't, because
Okay.
the ground stations already exclude any parameter that they don't see in the download of the parameters from the vehicle, right? So, for example, if you connect to your Omnibus F4 Pro, you don't see a lot of the BRD parameters that are specific to boards with an IOMCU. They automatically get excluded. So our XML file that we give to the ground stations and gets downloaded from the firmware site can include parameters that aren't actually on every vehicle, and that can include all of the sim parameters. It will mean a slightly larger download of that XML file, but I don't think that's really significant.
Actually, I'm generating a separate file for the CITL parameters.
Right, but that'll mean a bit more tooling, mid changes to the ground station. Why don't we just include it in the same XML file?
Well, the problem is we lost my initial shape for this was to add an @hal thing, which would have kind of permitted that because we could have plumbed that through, so you only saw the sim parameters in CITL. You don't want to mix these in with.
But you won't see them
parameters.
anyway, because the sim parameters won't turn up on the ground station. So ground stations automatically exclude the parameters that they don't see.
Pretty sure some of these things actually have kind of offline modes where I think QGC, you can get a parameter list without connection to the vehicle or something along those lines.
Okay. Seems like it would, like a one-line thing to QGC to exclude the sim parameters if it's not CITL, I guess. But I just want to make sure that it does turn up in the ground stations, particularly in Mission Planner. And I've found it really valuable to be able to point new users at the CITL experience within Mission Planner, the button to launch CITL, and then configuring the vehicle. And those sim parameters should be part of that.
So initially, I wanted something in that we could actually start getting value out of the markup that we would add to the code.
Sure.
So I was happy to get anything in at this point. And at the moment, I only generate the RST, not the XML. So
right, okay, yeah. No, I mean, you're right. It's great to have a start. The end goal should be that the ground stations do have it, and you should be able to do param help in mav proxy, for example, on any sim parameter.
Yep. But chicken and egg, and I wanted to actually break that.
Yeah, I understand. It's a fairly large lump of work to document all of those parameters, and they tend to change fairly quickly, those params. But I think it's similar to the AP perif. We need the AP perif ones and the sim ones. We've just left those out of the automatic generated documentation so far, and that should be one of our goals this year, to ensure that both of those are fully filled in. Yeah. Yep. The other one that's worth reviewing is some of the units. Well, you've got those PID ones up on the screen there, Henry. We're not entirely consistent in our units on the different messages. And I think it would be nice to, for example, standardize on, either degrees per second or radians per second on all of our rate messages. And personally, I'd prefer degrees per second. I know a lot of the control people would prefer radians per second, but I think degrees per second is easier to understand for most of our end users. And sorry, Leonard?
I agree.
Hey, great. I got you on board. Excellent.
Degrees per second in the parameters, radians per second in the code.
Yeah, and the radians per second in the code I completely agree with. But the log messages are an interface to users who are trying to tune. It should roughly match. It should match our parameters. And so I'm even thinking of saying that for example, the IMU message is currently all radians per second. It would be nicer if that was degrees per second. So yeah, anyway, that's something that I think is worth looking at, but particularly the PID ones, to understand the units of those and make those consistent. It will be easier with the switch of plane to AC PID, so at least we're using a common PID architecture.
The PIDs are a little bit trickier, Tridge, because the PIDs themselves are unitless.
Yeah.
And so we would need to have some sort of parameter or some sort of definition with the AC PID to say what unit that was actually in. So if we did that, then we could actually set the PID log to be whatever the unit is. We've set that PID that's operating. So it would be meters per second for the Excel, meters per second for velocity, degrees per second for the rate loop. You know what I mean?
Yeah. At the moment, plane, even the AC PID plane patch treats it scales the PIDs so that they're in our pseudo degrees, minus 45 to plus 45, which is our like surface deflection. I think it's worth considering whether that's the right choice.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hangover from back in the days where we never had floating point numbers.
It's done as a float. It's 45. It's not 4,500. It's done as a.
No, but that's the thing. 45 is just meaningless because you don't have 45 degrees of deflection. It's just some random number.
Yeah. Anyway.
It is right. It's just a completely random number, and that's why we use plus or minus 1, and it's it's a normalized output that's full deflection. You could say percentage, but plus or minus 1 is pretty much percentage, but plus or minus 45 degrees or 4,500 or whatever other random variable you choose there is it's just like I personally think we should be moving all of the servo outputs to plus or minus 1, not plus or minus 45 or 4,500 or something like some other random number.
Yeah, I've got to make Mav Explorer a bit smarter about the unit handling. We've got the nice unit messages in our logs now, but Mav Explorer doesn't really take advantage of them properly or at all, really. So that's something that's
I have a branch.
That's a to do for myself and maybe Peter if he's inspired.
Yeah, I have a branch for it somewhere.
Okay.
Which
Okay,
actually
great.
adds it, so you get your axes labeled appropriately. And I think there's actually code in there so that it changes things from things like radians into degrees if they're not already in your units.
All good. All right. So what else do we want to discuss around documentation at the moment? Did everyone note where their name was against items and put their hand up? Everyone promised sincerely they'll work harder on documentation?
Yep, for sure. I just stuck actually Leonard's latest attitude control PID diagram at the top of the copter attitude control wiki page.
All right.
Small thing.
Okay. So where did you put that?
Right at the top of the page. It might take it a minute or two. Well,
oh, you put it into the wiki. Right. Okay, great.
It's this page here. I'll just put the page in the chat there, but
great. Okay. All good. Okay, so if we're done with the documentation, we can move on to the next talk. And Rob has already let me know that that he's available to start his talk a little bit early. Is that correct, Rob? So you're there now? Rob, hello. Now he pinged me just a few minutes ago. Say that he was available to start a little bit earlier, just to see if he's actually in the list of participants here at the moment. He seems to have dropped off. All right, so we might just wait. We might have a few minute break. I know he's available. I suspect he's had another call or something that he's had to attend to. So we might just take a few minute break. So it's say we come back in and see whether he's ready in say 5 minutes time, or should we make it the quarter to the hour? So 11:45 Canberra time, say 8 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, let's try and make it back here at the quarter to the hour, and hopefully Roll will be ready then, and then we can move on to the ANU visual odometry